Oh, right.
Is this one up?
There we go.
Turn that one down. All right, so good morning. My name is Jesse Noller. You can see my contact information there. And thank you to Selena and the entire team here. We'll find it. You're not going to work? That's fine. AV, I hate you. Oh, it's iCal. Thanks. Thanks for that, jerk. So, title of my talk, Open Source Developers Are Your Secret Weapon. As I was saying, thank you to Selena and the entire Postgres Open team for inviting me here. Frankly, I was actually stunned and pretty honored to be invited to speak here. Just before this, I was saying, why on earth did you invite me to a Postgres conference? We know database well. And it really is an honor to be here. And for the record, the injury that she's talking about is the one time I took a vacation with my daughters and my wife. We went skiing and snowboarding, and I broke my butt bone, whichever bone that is, in like 7 different places. And then I ran a 2,500 person conference. That was really awesome. So, as Selena was saying, who am I? So ostensibly, I'm pretty much associated with my tribal kind of associations. I'm a Python core developer, ostensibly, although I haven't used my commit bit in quite some time. I'm the vice chair of the Python Software Foundation, which is the nonprofit foundation that oversees the Python intellectual property, marketing, trademarks, what have you. And as she said, I've been the chair of PyCon US for the last 2 years. I was involved in the program committee for several years before that, and I've been the sponsor coordinator for the last 4 years, and I'm doing it again the next 2 years. So a lot of the softer side of the Python community. And currently I work at Rackspace as a developer and community advocate. So I actually picked that title. My official title is like principal engineer or something else like that, suitably boring. But this kind of ties into what my talk is about today. Yeah, so one of the things is, as Selena mentioned, is that I'm exceedingly passionate about not just the Python community, but the entire developer community. It's sort of the entire subtext of the talk that I'm giving today. I've been steadily getting more heavily involved with the softer side of the Python and the entire developer community. Softer side, this is things like user interface, everything developer-oriented, onboarding, reducing the barrier to entry for everyone, setting community standards for communication for people getting involved, small m marketing, not the dirty marketing like here's brand X, brand B, but small m marketing, basically relationship building. Again, part of the talk. So, minor history. I started at Rackspace in April, not that long ago. I jumped from around a 55-person company to a string of startups where basically it's 20 people in a room working on something through big company acquisitions to a company of 5,500 people and growing. So jumping from 55 to 5,500 is slightly alarming. My lizard brain hasn't adapted yet. You should try working in a remodeled mall. It's disturbing. But why? Why did I jump from a startup into this giant company when everything was telling me not to? Basically, they approached me and they said, we love community, we love open source, and we want to be better participants, we want to be better stewards, we want to be more involved. And they want to do the entire developer community right. They want to be better developers. They started down this path several years ago with the release of OpenStack, which is an operating system for the cloud. I'm not going to go into what that actually means. So the offer was fairly compelling to me for several reasons. First, obviously, is the fact that they were coming to me and saying they want to get better. This shows a level of self-awareness and dedication to a path that they started down with OpenStack, which represents millions of dollars of research and development, programming time, et cetera. And that doesn't include the other open source projects. So up on their project GitHub, they probably have another 300 open source projects that they contribute to, not including the ones they contribute to that are already established open source projects. But the level of self-awareness is what triggered me. Their honest dedication to the community, to developers, it was actually fairly astounding to me. And this is like CEO, like board of directors level, all the way down to engineers. Like, it was systemic. They want to do amazing things. They want to do open source. They want to do open design, open collaboration. And they honestly do not believe in lock-in in any component of their offerings. They don't want lock-in on the API level. They don't want lock-in on the code level. Like, it's very honest. They have a systemic understanding that software is not their core differentiator. And this is very interesting, and this is kind of where the world has been going. Software is a byproduct of delivering services, support, knowledge, skills, operating systems at scale. Like, for example, Postgres. It's open source. Anyone can contribute to it. But where do most of the companies make their money? They make it by weaponizing it, of running it at billions of petabytes of scale, of doing data intelligence on it. But what Rackspace is kind of moving towards, and what I'm there to act as a sort of an instigator and burn down the building while I'm in the process of doing it, is open source by default and community by default. Hence this talk. So no, this isn't an advertisement for my employer. It's not. I just wanted to give you some historical context. 99% of my actual professional career, since I was 17 or 18, has been in enterprise/closed source software companies, where open source is, to a certain extent, a bad word. It's not entirely a bad word, but it's almost wholly self-serving. You build products on open source, contribute patches if something breaks, sometimes, or you bribe people to fix the patches. But you only open source code in your company on the fringes. Open source fringes. Fringe code is glue code. Maybe testing components, little libraries that do helper tasks, nothing that touches your core intellectual property. How many people, raise your hand if you've heard this term before, core intellectual property. That's a really fantastic term. Lawyers love it, and they make all the money. This term shows the mindset of most companies in the past 20 years. Code is a differentiator, right? Code is their core intellectual property. When you look at complex systems, or systems companies think are complex, and are therefore their secret sauce, what you actually really see is code that's very tightly coupled. When they say it's complex, what they mean is it's very tightly coupled and tied to a very specialized domain. And this is the pattern most software and software as a service companies actually follow to this day. It's very tightly coupled, it's proprietary, it's their core intellectual property. But where do they start? They have a problem. And from that, they look to the quickest solution from zero to the solution or product. They shop around the open source world if they're smart. Now, in all seriousness, lots of companies won't actually go near open source, right? This is actually something that to this day is still very true. And that's actually ignoring copyleft licenses like the GPL, AGPL, PL, PL, PL. They run really fast developing perceived intellectual property in jazz hands exit scene. This is a very common pattern to this day. But somewhere along the line, a developer says, hey, can I open source this non-core library widget, something or other? And the response is typically, is it tied to our core intellectual property? Does it expose our core intellectual property in some way? If not, go to a lawyer and get sign-off. It's really awesome, because lawyers in open source, except in the case of my friend Van Lindbergh, typically don't mix very well. And then you go to senior management or the board of directors, depending on the company's size, to get sign-off. And this could be a 10-line open source thing, and you have to go through 17 layers of approvals just to get it open sourced and out there in the world. And don't even get me started on licensing. It's worse than naming things in the computer science world. Then they put it on a page, and they trumpet their dedication to open source. Right? They put out a press release, and it's on PR Newswire and everything else like that, and they're like, you know, we just released this 10-line thing, and we're dedicated to open source. It's like, really? So yeah, that's a pretty cynical view. Luckily, it's actually not one that I've had to deal with very heavily in the last 4 or 5 years. The enterprise world is actually changing, albeit very slowly. This is what enterprises do. They move at sloth pace, although sloths are cute, enterprises aren't. Open sourcing things within companies is sort of getting easier. Solving really hard problems, perceived core intellectual property and everything else like that, in the open is actually becoming more common. You can see this like Twitter is releasing more and more source code of highly complex data systems. Facebook, even though there's issues with sometimes chucking code over the wall. A lot of companies are actually putting hard problems out there in the open. But has it changed that much? Open source and communities have been growing exponentially. The number of people involved in the industry and communities as software developers is actually growing astronomically. And we're actually seeing explosive growth in open source projects, open source contributions, et cetera. You know, it's all roses. Everything's perfect, right? But backing up a moment. The code thrown from the cathedral into the bazaar, so the cathedral and the bazaar, really good book, still very relevant to today's culture. It's been growing in complexity. It's been solving more and more hard problems. Look at Postgres. Look at the features Postgres is adding. They are solving more and more complex problem domains. A lot of these projects aren't started as open source, though. And very frequently, they die on delivery. You'll see a press release saying, I open sourced the non-relational Mongo web scale thingamabob, and they chuck it out into GitHub, and that's that. But if the number of developers is increasing, and the amount of code in the wild is increasing, maybe this means developers are becoming more influential. This gives rise to this idea from RedMonk as developers as kingmakers. Yes, developers are becoming more and more widespread, and they're becoming more and more influential within companies. We've shifted from a world where development of products and services is left to the big boys, and it's coming from everyone. One person in the living room with a dog, little startups in Silicon Valley with, you know, some incubated amount of money, and it's all the way up to big companies. But fundamentally, every company, small, medium, and large, is going to have a development team within the next couple of years. That development team is actually going to directly influence the decisions and adoptions of businesses and the technology that they make over the next 10 years. Significantly influential. And so yeah, market growth. This is something to take back to your business people. Most companies, my own included, when you do the research and you run the numbers, developers are going to account for 15 to 20% or more of their market growth over the next several years. That is not an insignificant number. But this fundamentally means developers are becoming more influential. And then companies flip around and they say, okay, so what this means is that we have to have a developer story. You're like, developer story? Okay, is this like a coloring book? Or my favorite, the developer-focused go-to-market strategy. No, I may have gone to the side of evil slightly, but I'm not that evil yet. What do they mean when they actually talk about the developer-focused go-to-market strategy? Well, if your business is looking for a developer story, maybe what they really mean is they need a community story. It's an ecosystem story. You're not going to make fat stacks of cash with developer-focused banner ads, 30-second spots on TV, traditional marketing engagement simply don't work. And this is where a lot of companies get it horribly wrong. They don't understand their developer story is fundamentally very similar to what they've done in the past with OEMs. It's relationships, it's community. Companies don't grasp it. What they also don't grasp is they're not special. Every company likes to think that they're special in some way on a code level. They're not. Software is a byproduct of solving a problem. It doesn't necessarily solve the entire problem domain. Your company isn't the only one having the problem that you're solving. You aren't the only one scratching the itch. You need a developer story. You need a community story. So why not empower developers and communities outside of your own company by inviting them to be part of the solution, the conversation, and the community? But why open source? Really brief. Faster time to develop in theory. I'm not saying that's always true. Sometimes things change. More disciplined development in theory. Code reviews, good check-in messages, over-communicating documentation. It's not a guarantee that you're going to have better development practices, but it does expose your policies to the light so you can't get away with doing it as wrong. Businesses, well, if you're involved heavily in the open source community and you're open sourcing things that your company generates, recruiting is actually way, way, way easier. And I don't mean scraping GitHub profiles and sending spam. That's, no. It helps with marketing. It helps with brand awareness, the overall perception that your company actually cares and actually wants to be involved. Eyeballs. Buzz and mindshare together have wide-reaching implications for even pure open source non-business projects. You actually, somebody was talking on Twitter the other day about, do I need marketing for my open source project? The answer is, yeah. Not big M marketing with some fancy pants guy who makes a lot more than you, but small M marketing, relationship building, community building. But it's not just more ideas or buzz or mindshare. It's also more viewpoints. By definition, your immediate team inside of your company is limited in its viewpoints. It's very, I don't want to use a bad word, but it's very inward focused. Building a community is literally the only way to improve the access of ideas that you're going to have. So putting your code, your idea, and your design in front of the worldwide developer community means you're going to get more ideas, bug fixes, contributions from places you never expected. Heck, competitors, we see this in OpenStack, right? HP, everyone. These are competitors to Rackspace. They contribute to the OpenStack code base just as much, if not more, than we do, right? This is a huge change, right? They're interested in the same problem domain. They're in the same business domain, but they're openly contributing designs, new systems, bug fixes, patches, etc. They're giving more ideas. Do we need to run it at scale? Do we need this type of thing to fix this? These ideas are coming from external, and this is very important for the growth of a project and a company. Another thing to remember. This is probably the most text I have on a slide. That, my friends, is Conway's Law. Conway's Law is very real. So Conway's Law basically says that the design of a system will directly reflect the communication structure of your company. Sweet God, working in the enterprise world, this is so painfully true, it hurts. So why open source? Why mention Conway's Law? Conway's Law is actively working against closed source, non-community involved solutions and software. As your team and your organization grows larger, it will begin to break down, and Conway's Law will start to take more and more effect within your software and your solutions. So if Conway's Law is a disease, Open collaboration is a way to help mitigate it to an extent. The long-term rot that will come to your code, to your solution, to your idea, to your business plan can help, it can be mitigated by doing open collaboration, open design, and open source. But fundamentally, you need an ecosystem. There's a variety of business cases to open source software that have already been made. Look at Red Hat, look at IBM. You know, all of these companies have made these very large business cases with dollars, cents, and very pretty graphs about how to open source stuff. These were all done by people much smarter than me, by the way, math. But the fact is, you're solving a problem, personal or business, and you need an ecosystem. Things built on what you make to help you prove what you've made. That's the basic definition of an ecosystem. Moreover, you need a community. Communities will help you build an ecosystem. You need a vibrant, engaged, empowered, and welcoming community to help you build your ecosystem. Not for you. They're not going to do it for you. They're not unpaid workers to take advantage of, which I have seen used as an argument to open source quite a few times. Empowering the community of developers out there to build great things using what you've made, it'll help your ecosystem grow, and it will grow overnight. And this is the Ballmer slide, and I'm not going to do the dance. So yes, I've said developers quite a bit. Your company, your project needs community. It needs an ecosystem. It needs developers. Most companies today can't survive without them. And that means you need to reach out to them on their own ground and in their own terms. That means contributing to existing projects, showing yourself to be active and engaged, or opening your own code and engaging the community on an honest, equal level. And developers doesn't just mean coders. It means designers. It means operations people. It means doc writers. If you're part of making something, you are a developer. I don't just mean code. And relationships matter, especially when you're engaging in a conversation. When you open source something and you engage in collaboration, engage in open design, you begin a conversation. That conversation will tell you something very important and something that I see a lot of companies learning more and more. It isn't just about you or your company or your project. It's about all of us. And people like to feel like they belong to something. And communities that actively treat people as equals help make people, and developers especially, feel welcome. It also tells you something else. The conversations and the contributions will tell you the needs, the pains, and the ideas that come from the community are actually more aligned with you and those of your business than you could have ever possibly imagined. They will lead you places that you could have never thought before because, again, it's all about ideas. You may think that all you need is a relational database, and then somebody's going to say, hey, why don't we just stick some JSON in there, and we got this massive key value store, and all of a sudden you're like, I never thought of that. Like, very good. But having honest, polite, open collaboration will bring you places that you could have never, ever imagined. It will help your thing, your project, your company get adopted. It will help it mature, grow more robust, more scalable, more secure, more eyeballs. So yeah, lots of words. Not on the slides, but coming from my mouth. How? How do you build a community of developers that are actively engaged, communicating, using your tools, using your services? The transition from idea or product to community and ecosystem doesn't happen overnight. I don't have all of the answers. I do have a lot of ideas that I've learned from both the hard way and the easy way, and from others. But a word of warning. The 99-1 rule. 90% of the participants of a community only view and consume. 9% of those participants actively do drive-by contributions. This is like one-line patches or things like that. You never hear from them again. 1% of the participants contribute heavily. You want to take measures like those I'm outlining to counteract this. So if you've got 10 developers internally working on something, then you open source it. Maybe that becomes the core of your 1%. But fundamentally, most people are going to only consume. So you want to increase your community, the size and the diversity of that community, so that you can counteract this. Because this is actively working against you. It works against the entire internet. Unless it's memes, then it's like 90% of the people contribute 90% of the stuff. And 1% ignore it. The first anti-pattern. Open source developers are not unpaid lackeys. This is what a lot of companies and teams assume they are. It's relatively unfortunate, and I'm glad I don't work for a company that treats them like this. They are your equals. They are your lifeblood, your collaborators. Starting up with the expectation that they'll do stuff for us instead of with us will set up a toxic relationship, and I guarantee you, you will die. Your project will die, your company will die. Go ahead, try to get a bunch of unpaid labor on the internet. That'll work out for you. The first positive pattern, be cordial. Be cordial. Set standards. As Kenneth Reitz, a friend of mine, says, be cordial or go home. You need to set standards of communication and community very early on. When I say community, I don't just mean the domain specialists that might find your code compelling, self-identified language tribes, data nerds, something else like that, but also the worldwide developer community. You have to set behavioral and community standards early in a project's life cycle. If you don't, and you allow it to be a free-for-all, you will pay for it. You'll have lower contribution levels, you'll get poison on mailing lists, it will actively work against you in the long term. I'm going to call something out. Some people are going to disagree with me. Don't follow the Linux kernel model. Sorry. It's something that I feel very strongly about, and you can talk to me later about that. Despite what you may think, the world we live in is not a pure meritocracy. It's not. It's not just about code talks, GTFO, patch welcome. Having common standards and applying these standards, one method is a code of conduct. I don't recommend it for everyone, and it's not the one solution. Just simply say, don't be a jerk. But setting this common communication expectation across all communication systems, especially IRC, is going to help you long term, especially IRC. IRC is Viper Pit. The other thing that you need is documented contribution guidelines. How many open source projects do I see that have you look at it and you're like, okay, how do I contribute? And if you say GitHub pull request, I'm just going to beat you with a newspaper. You need a hacking.txt file. You need documentation that helps people know how to contribute, not just code, docs, visual design, test cases, everything. If it's possible for people to contribute it to your project, you need to document it so that they can actually say, I am actively excited about this and I want to help you. In fact, document everything. Seriously. If you don't have human usable documentation, an auto-generated documentation doesn't count. It doesn't count. It's not made for people. Your project is worse than useless. It's dangerous. It will blow somebody's hands off and they're going to be very angry pants at you. Don't use wikis for documentation unless you want to have an entire dedicated staff of maintainers constantly pruning and cleaning and chasing dead links or chasing spammers. Go and use a real documentation tool. I personally love Sphinx. It comes out of the Python community. It's a lovely tool, but there's also ASCII doc. There's DocBook, which I don't like because of the XML format. But, there are plenty of actual structured documentation tools that actually make it very easy for people to contribute documentation. Wikis aren't one of them. Wikis are where information goes to die. You need teaching materials and tutorials. I don't like wikis. I'm sorry. Don't just have reference documentation. Teach people how to use what you're making. Have client-side tools, if it's an API, SDKs, little client, like command line tools, etc., that show users how to do things, how to accomplish something. They'll get even more excited about your project if it's easier to use it, to lower the barrier. People will adopt it faster the more tutorials and the more example code that you actually have. They'll get more involved. They'll also understand more. Most of all, keep this up to date. Don't let your tutorials lag like 16 releases behind Django. Sorry, Jacob. I know you're listening. Don't just chuck code out there. Seriously, how many companies trumpet their own open source horn when they donate code to the Apache Software Foundation? Literally, it's press release after press release. I'm not saying the ASF is bad. I'm just saying that companies like to say, woohoo, open source. And that's that. You never see anything from them again. Or worse, they panic when people use it. This is my favorite one. They open source it, people start using it, and they're like, oh, and they go and make a proprietary fork of their own open source project because they panic because other people are using it and contributing things to it. This happens a lot more than you think. And of course, you never see them in the changelog ever again. Communities don't appear magically like a bunch of gnomes in the night. Sure, more open source is good, in theory, but dead code is dead code, even if it is open source. So don't just chuck it. You have to assume that successful contributions by your business, by you as an individual, require ongoing commitment. It's sort of like getting in a relationship or having kids, except, well, actually it's more like having kids when they're small and there's arguments and things like that. Sorry, Abby. It requires ongoing commitment. Don't throw and go. Don't think that you can just chuck something over the wall and walk away from it, right? Get in the relationship. Communicate everything. Communicate, 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 communicate. I can't say it enough. And you should apply all of these theories, all of these guidelines to your internal development processes too. Treat your internal systems more like an open source project. And you'll actually see that, hey, there are benefits. You need to communicate via IRC, mailing lists, Google Hangouts, everything you can possibly handle and still get the job done. Coupled with community standards, communications channels will be invaluable for you to be successful. This is how, for example, remember Conway's Law. Conway's Law is actively working against you. Democratize your communication structure. Break it up. Do everything that you can. This plus everything else I'm outlining will help you. Don't just have one method of communication. Get involved in user groups. Get involved in hack days. This will make you thrive. This is like, raise your hand if you've heard about Docker. Wow, that's a lot fewer than I thought. Google. No. Anyways, Docker is this lovely project. It started several months ago. It came out of .cloud. And it started off, it's a wrapper around Linux containers for, it's basically the iPhone of LXC, right? It makes it very easy to spin up and manage these containers and share these containers and everything else like that. And they started getting involved in hack days. They started doing kind of road shows and everything else like this about this project. It's become their full-time job. Like .cloud actually has a very large dedicated staff of people working on just this open source thing because they did it right. They documented everything. They actually put together a website that didn't suck. They had clear contribution guidelines, and they got involved in the community very heavily, very early on. And their velocity is astounding. It is astounding. They've got hundreds of contributors on a months-old project. And they've got people running a non-production ready release in production. It's like, whoa, 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 slow down. Another one, pick a license. We're not in a post-open source world. I hate that term, and I've heard it used way too many times. I don't care what license you pick. I favor permissive non-copyleft licenses. It's me. Apache 2, BSD, MIT. Frequently picking one of these in conjunction with clear community involvement guidelines and contribution guidelines will allow and encourage people working at big companies to contribute. OpenStack is a prime example of this. It's Apache 2 licensed. They have specific trademarks that they help say you can use the trademark if you comply with this or you comply with that. But it's very clear on how to contribute, and companies contribute a lot to it. In fact, I'd say most of the commits that go into OpenStack are from startups, big companies, and everything else like that. It's very collaborative, and we see businesses flocking to it. A lot of it is the license. Yes, they can go off and make a proprietary fork or run it as a service and do all these supposedly evil things. But really, is it evil if they're contributing to it and they're actively involved in the community? I'd say no. Another thing that you need to have, a list of easy but not necessarily trivial things that newcomers can chew on. Whether it's docs, smaller patch reviews, something. It's all about increasing your project's velocity and visibility. You want to empower the community and work to fix the 99.1% rule. If you empower them to contribute, you'll be able to counteract this and have more active contributors. Don't mark, by the way, don't mark tickets like rename this variable where the value isn't at all apparent, like in Postgres. I'm sure it's like, rename this variable. And then you're like, well, that touches like 200 source files. That'd be really awesome. And could you imagine being a newbie, like going into that and being like, I'm going to rename this variable. And all of a sudden, you know, everything breaks and you get yelled at. It's really terrible. And having taken on bugs like this in the past for like Python core, it's really awesome when you make the interpreter seg fault. Really awesome. Actually checked that in and went into production. This is a sacred cow. Sorry, I'm going to sit up here and stab it. You see it, no core committers. Don't have gatekeepers to your repository. This is another thing that I learned from OpenStack. And in my opinion, OpenStack, which landed over 15,000 patches in the last release alone, is an exemplar here. They don't have core committers. What they have is several hundred core reviewers. So when I submit a patch to OpenStack, I just simply say, hey, please review. And I can add specific names. I can say, hey, Alex, hey, Doug, come review this. And if it gets enough, I don't remember what the quorum is, but if it gets enough people saying, check, 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 I sign off on this, Jenkins, the continuous integration server, commits it to the repo. Not one person, not 15 people. Like the CI system does this. It's pretty trippy because all of a sudden you've got 15,000 bug fixes, patches, and features going in, just streaming into the project. This equalizes all of the players. And it also reduces your bus factor, because imagine if you only have 5 core committers and they all go on vacation at once. Good luck with that. Yes, this can be difficult on smaller teams and smaller projects, but as you grow, it will save you socially. You can still set benevolent dictators or to act as a tiebreaker on like difficult decisions, but they should be treated as equals to all of your committers. What you should have is core reviewers, as I said. You need to have a solid, dedicated group of core reviewers. These people are responsible to review patches, to ensure quality of submissions, to help you guide and teach committers best practices, gotchas. They're mentors. They're not gatekeepers anymore. And if they lose the time to work on it, or if they lose interest, you don't lose the ability to commit or make releases. And this is very, very significant. And public patch review sessions via Google Hangout, for example, are amazing. They help teach people new things, new ways to build relationships, inspire confidence. They inspire transparency. Having this very democratic, just, we're going to review this in the public, don't be shy, we don't bite, is very, very welcoming. And you'll see contributions come from people you never even thought possible before. This goes internally as well to your internal software projects. And this is part of what I'm working at Rackspace to apply these standards internally as well. all of a sudden you have people from completely different departments contributing to something that, is driving $16 million of annual revenue. It's awesome. This all ties together. You need clear ownership without fiefdoms. Subject matter experts for a given area need to be accessible to non-core folks. You want a diverse community, not a closed one that's self-reinforcing. If you have project leads, feature leads, people who own a particular thing, you need more than one, and they need to be accessible. At a certain point in your career, as a developer, you actually start writing less code and start mentoring more. And you start trying to teach people, being accessible to people, doing code reviews, things like that. This is amazing. And this is actually something that helps level everyone up. So not having these fiefdoms, these political battles about, this feature doesn't belong here because I don't have the vision for it, et cetera, break that down, right? You don't need it internally. It'll poison your well for your proprietary software or your closed source software and your closed development practices. It's just as easy to poison an open source project. The day one commit bit. This is really awesome. In corporate open source and free software projects, it's actually not unusual to see new employees. Like basically, you have an open source project and a bunch of committers, and the next thing you know, some dude you don't know is suddenly committing things to core. And you're like, whoa, you didn't even introduce yourself. Who the hell are you? Well, he's an employee of the company. He got the commit bit when the rest of you actually had to do 100 reviews before you got the commit bit or something else like that, or the review bit. In community and open source free software projects, you get the commit bit or the review bit when you've earned it. The day one commit bit shows the community members outside of your company that they're playing by different rules than your employees. There's plenty of other quicker ways to start getting the community to start ignoring your company. This will poison the well. This will actually turn the community actively against your company. Don't do this. In fact, my own team, most of our open source projects on the team that I work on, we don't own. They're either owned by the Apache Software Foundation or other entities. And all of the people that we hire on, none of them get the commit bit into these repositories on day one. What they do is they have to go through the formal voting. Each project is different. Apache Software Foundation projects are very different and very varied. But they don't get the day one commit bit. They have to go through the same review process. They have to have everyone vouch for them. And very typically, we recuse ourselves from the conversation. We want them to be treated as equals. We want them to stand on their own. The big show. This is another anti-pattern. This is a pattern where companies will work for many months on something behind closed doors before announcing it to the public. This is how software is made, right? This is the way companies have worked for decades. This behavior actually negatively impacts the ability of a community to grow outside of your walls. Project members are assigned to secret projects. They interact less with the community because they're off in this little secret project world. And the end result is a great big magical code drop. You're just like, look at the awesome thing that we have made and bestowed upon you. And it's not had public peer review. It wasn't listed on any roadmap and before its announcement. And what it results in is the people outside of your company feeling like second-class citizens. Again, what you've just done is you said, well, we had 10 developers working on this secret project, and we just chucked it over the wall and gifted you with it. It's really not awesome. Raise your hands if you've heard about bike shedding. That is disappointingly few. All of you know about it, trust me. In very, very, very briefly, bike shedding is essentially, I can build a nuclear reactor, and I can say these are the plans of a nuclear reactor, and no one will argue with me because no one has nuclear physics backgrounds, right? Everyone's just like, oh, that's a great nuclear reactor. But if I put a bike shed right next to it, everyone is going to argue about the color of the bloody bike shed because no one can wrap their heads around the nuclear reactor, but everyone wants to paint that bike shed a different shade of blue. This happens in every single company, mailing list, open source project sooner or later. While probably on topic, nevertheless, they effectively drown out other discussions on more significant issues. And they make people coming into the project view you as basically a bunch of poisonous people who aren't welcoming because you're going to get bike shedded to death. Generally, you can mitigate this by encouraging a community which rewards action. 2 ways of doing this: encourage the person bike shedding the most, because there's always 1 or 2 people doing it the most. I have been one of them. I'm Jesse, and I'm a reformed bike shedder. So basically encourage the person to provide an implementation of their proposal, having taken into account the most significant remarks, or propose a bake-off if there are competing philosophies. If you have 6 philosophies or 6 approaches, and you say, everyone go and implement it, guarantee you'll probably only get 1. And that goes back to code talks. If they implemented it and it works, they win. Don't mistake setting community standards as the inability to have hard conversations. You can be cordial, you can be respectful, while still having hard conversations and saying no. Your project needs a vision. It needs to have a future. That means saying no sometimes. You can be opinionated without being a jerk. And this is something that many, many open source projects and as open source project leaders forget. This is kind of overkill for smaller projects, but please get a formal standardization process. Python enhancement proposal or PEP process, OpenStack blueprints, anything. Just pick one. I don't care what color it is. This will help you when you get bigger. When somebody says, by the way, here's a giant feature I'm going to propose. Not having standards makes it very hard for people to see how to get those big ideas into your project. Set the tone and the methodology early. Here's one that's near and dear to my heart. Hack days with prizes where a company takes all submissions. This is spec work, if you're familiar with the term from the artist realm. The company is conning you into contributing to them. They will award the prizes, they will vet the projects, they will award prizes. It's not involving the community as a whole. This is especially insidious for code drops, where basically they're like, oh, hack on this, and then we'll pull this in, and congratulations, we picked the winner. Basically, if you're a company and you're thinking about doing this, get people in your community, get people who aren't part of you involved in judging, handing out prizes, everything else like that. Again, you're trying to equalize the community. You're trying to build contributors. You're trying to build an ecosystem. You need people outside of you to help with this. This goes internally too. Get other people from other teams involved. Most of all, celebrate and raise up your community, just as you would an employee. Release MVPs, right? People who did a ton of work to get a release out the door for your open source project or something else like that. You've got to stand them up. Send thank you notes to first-time contributors. That does amazing things. If you just simply say, oh, this is your first time contributing, thank you. A 2-word email will actually get people coming back more than you could ever possibly imagine. Inviting the community to release parties. So if you're a company like Rackspace and you have a huge OpenStack release, we have a party and we invite community members. You need to give them feedback and bonuses just as you would an employee. Fundamentally, building a product or a thing isn't enough. You need an ecosystem, you need a community. And that community must be nurtured, nudged, and grown and developed just as much as your code in your company. Remember, credibility is earned by individuals, not companies. This is why you need to focus on community and collaboration. The credibility you need for a project in the open source world will come from the people in your organization contributing. Empower the community as a whole, and your credibility as a project and company will thrive. Many companies, Oracle, have made the mistake that they can have the idea that companies can gain this huge amount of credibility through open source, right? They just say, our company is now better because we are now open source, air quote. And then the community withers and dies and everything else like that, because the community blowback is basically, hey, listen, you guys haven't actually contributed that much. Instead, what you've done is you've made it more difficult. It blows back on you. Their communities will revolt and reject them. It's a pattern that happens time and time and time again. So kind of circling back. Your company and your project needs a vibrant community and ecosystem to compete. It needs it to succeed and grow long term. Community needs define you, define what you solve. There's no better way to engage them than openly and collaboratively, coming to them and saying, we have an idea, we have a problem, help us, and we will help you. So let's strike this idea down. Developers as kingmakers, because it's not just one developer doing it, right? Not one developer. It's communities and collaboration. They are the kingmakers. Moving forward in the next 10 years, we're going to see this more and more. Collaboration around a common cause and problem is the kingmaker. Which goes back to my very misleading and intentionally misleading title. Open source developers are your secret weapon. They're not. Community and collaboration is your secret weapon. This is how you will take an idea and turn it into a rampaging success where hundreds of companies are empowered to build amazing things and millions of developers are empowered. And I couldn't resist because the entire talk was hippie. Sharing is caring. I said I didn't have any animated GIFs, and I had to put it in. So a few additional notes as I close. You want to watch the talk, Growing Open Source Seeds by Kenneth Reitz. You want to read Producing Open Source Software. It's actually in Rev 2. It's a fantastic book about building communities, building open source software, and the political fights and things like that. And Jacob Kaplan-Moss did an excellent talk at Heroku's Waza conference. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Craig. Or is it Waza? From Boston, sorry. He did an excellent talk about ecosystems, extensibility, documentation, a lot of the things that I've talked about. If you go to this URL, I kind of bundled everything together, and you can kind of take a look at some of my notes. So thanks for bearing with me. Have an excellent conference, and thanks again for the invite. And I hope what I said today wasn't completely redundant, and hopefully you can help join all of us. So thank you.